This is Keep Up. I'm your host, Cynthia Dill. It's Tuesday, April 7th, 2026. I'm in my Cape Elizabeth studio and it's snowing out. That's why I have a nice cozy sweater on because it is April, but it's snowing here in Maine. Tonight's show is just an update on a very important case that my law office has the privilege and honor of bringing on behalf of Katie Mountain against the Maine Department of Corrections. And I think it really illustrates the adage that we often hear. I'm paraphrasing Margaret Mead, don't doubt the ability of a small group to get anything done. In fact, that's basically the only way things get done. And I butchered that paraphrase, but you know what I mean. And the small group that I'm thinking of is the New England Women's Solidarity. It's an advocacy organization that's a couple years old, founded by Jennifer Gingrich and Christy Hammer. And these two women, advocate for sex-based realism, you know, recognizing the biological reality of the female sex. And they have done advocacy around a lot of issues, gender affirming care for kids, for instance, the silencing of women for speaking up for gender realist rights, for standing up for women. But most recently, they focused on the travesty that is playing out in prisons because of this crazy gender ideology that the Democratic Party and liberals in the United States and across the world actually have been shoving down our throats, this ideology that suggests falsely that sex can change, that sex doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, and that really by sheer will you can change from a male to a female. Well, a lot of people reject that because it's false, but it is an ideology that is forced on us. And in the state of Maine, not only do we have to accept this gender identity as a protected class, but in prisons, the inmates who are forced to house with men, the female inmates who are forced to house with men, are compelled to affirm their gender identity. So we're challenging that. We're challenging the constitutionality of a law that was passed in Maine in 2021 that mandates the jails in Maine to house prisoners according to their gender identity without regard to their physical stature, without regard to whether or not they've had a sex change, without regard to really anything other than the prisoner himself declaring that he identifies as a woman. And the absurdity of this law is demonstrated in the case of Katie Mountain, who is serving a 10-month sentence for a nonviolent crime. She violated her probation. She's at the women's facility and gets forced into a locked cell with Andrew Balser, who is a man was convicted in 2017 of the brutal bludgeoning of his parents with a knife. He stabbed his parents to death and then stabbed his dog and was convicted of murder, serving 40 years. Spent his first from 2017 to 2022 in the men's facility. But in 2021, Maine passed this gender affirmation law that requires the Department of Corrections to house inmates according to their stated gender identity. And sure enough, Andrew Balser had sudden onset womanhood and declared himself as a female and was moved to the women's facility. So Katie Mountain, my client, arrives at the facility, is put in a locked cell with this guy, and he begins to harass and sexually assault her. He trapped her in the bathroom, threw her against the wall, forced a kiss on her, read graphic stories that he wrote about her, threatened to rape her, essentially said, if you don't wake up, don't worry, it's because I smothered you. Now, this is in a context of other trans identifying men also being in the women's facility. For instance, a guy who was serving 15 years for, sexually assaulting children. So the women in Maine are faced with men in the women's facility because of this law. So this lawsuit that I'm bringing challenges the constitutionality of the law, but it also challenges the constitutionality of a policy that the Department of Corrections has adopted in Maine that no longer provides for protections on the basis of sex. The discrimination policies that you see, the Maine Human Rights Commission protects on the basis of race, national origin, sex, religion, creed. The laundry list of protected classes always has included sex for as long as I can remember as a civil rights lawyer. But the Maine Department of Corrections policy on discrimination just took sex right out. So they no longer have a policy that protects women on the basis of sex. And it shows the women at the Maine Correctional Center are being discriminated against because they are forced to be in a locked cell to bunk with men because they claim to be women. This is contrary to everything we know about good prison standards and protecting the safety and well-being of female prisoners, right? The Nelson Mandela rules, the Geneva Convention. I mean, all around the world, it's generally accepted that you separate men and women in prisons on the basis of sex. And Maine has a law that says prisons are to be separated between men and women. But gender affirmation got through. It's a partisan law. All of this gender identity stuff in Maine is highly partisan. The Democrats are pushing to include gender identity in the Constitution, which would erase protections on the basis of sex, really for women entirely. That's the Democratic platform. The Republican platform here in the state of Maine wants to repeal gender identity laws. If gender identity laws are repealed, then that is a step in the right direction to protections on the basis of sex. But even if you acknowledge that there are people who wish to express a gender identity, everyone agrees that that should be allowed under the First Amendment. Nobody is saying that there should be a prohibition on expressing yourself as a woman if you are a man. But we've gone too far. The gender identity laws give men the right, the legal right, to enter women's spaces, including prisons, including shelters, to play on women's teams, to steal athletic medals on the subjective belief that they have that they identify as something other than they are. And the laws in the state of Maine have been just manipulated by the left that we're trying to dig ourselves out of this mess. And this lawsuit is a start. And so we filed the case. I had to file a First Amended Complaint to clean things up. It was interesting. I did use AI for the first time. I was hoping that when I had finished drafting the 30-page complaint, that AI could do magic with it. But unfortunately, it couldn't really help me with the complaint because of the heightened pleading standards that you have in these civil rights cases, even though the rules of procedure say you just have to allege, an outline really of a case. When it comes to civil rights cases, you have to provide an adequate factual context in order to survive the first round of litigation. The first volley in these cases is the government going to it's going to file a motion to dismiss. And the motion to dismiss is going to look at the complaint, and the complaint has to have sufficient factual allegations to meet the requirements on all of the claims. So we have claims under the Eighth Amendment against, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. We're alleging that the housing of male inmates with females and the sexual assault and harassment and terrorizing that they're experiencing at the Maine Correctional Center is a violation of their Eighth Amendment right to be protected against cruel and unusual punishment. So you have to allege facts that, meet that standard. We're alleging that the activity, the conduct, that the enforcement of this gender affirmation law and these policies that the Department of Correction has on housing transgender inmates and discrimination that doesn't include sex, we're alleging that the enforcement of that is a violation of the First Amendment, our freedoms of speech and thought, our freedoms, to have religion, to not only have our own religious beliefs. In the case of Katie Mountain, as a Christian, as a Baptist, who it's contrary to her religious beliefs that she's cohabited, living with, bunking with, sharing a bathroom with, sharing a shower with somebody who's not her husband. It's against her religious beliefs to affirm that this man is a woman because in the Bible, men and women were created in the eyes of God separately. And it's just against her conscience to affirm a man's gender identity as a female when he is threatening to rape her. So First Amendment freedoms of speech, First Amendment freedoms of religion, state compelled religion. We're alleging that this gender affirmation policy and this requirement that the staff and the other inmates affirm the gender identity, the false gender identity of Andrew Balser, right? He is a male. He has a penis. He threatens to rape and impregnate women. Um, there's nothing about him that is authentically or biologically female. He's not a female, but the Department of Corrections lists him as one, and we think that's a violation. We allege that the activity, not only the assaults and the harassment, the terrorizing, but the retaliation is a violation of the Constitution. That when Katie Mountain sent a letter to the Maine Wire, a local conservative news outlet, that in response, she was retaliated against. The guards there gave her grief, said, "Oh, you just wanted your 15 minutes of fame," and suddenly she's getting clothes that are too big, and her name tag is ironed the wrong way, so it's distorted, and she's, her cell's getting raided, and they're reading through her papers. This is what she alleges, that she was retaliated against for speaking up. All of the women who complain about sexual assault by Andrew Balser are stuck in segregation, and that's unlawful retaliation. And there's also a count against Andrew Balser for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress. So this complaint has been filed. Now it has to be served on the defendants. Like I said, I expect there be a motion to dismiss. What I'm hoping, though, is that the federal government, the United States Department of Justice, under the leadership in the Civil Rights Division of Harmeet Dillon, I would love it if the United States intervened, because we need the resources of the federal government to protect these women on a larger scale. We need the Supreme Court or the district court to say that the law is unconstitutional, to issue an order enjoining the Department of Corrections commissioner and the warden from enforcing it. And we could use the help of the United States government. So we'll see if the Department of Justice is going to lend a hand in this. I know they're busy with a lot of issues, and this one is important. So stay tuned. I just did an interview for Channel 8. I think there's some interest in the case. And it's going to be interesting to see who defends Andrew Balser, if it's going to be the ACLU or Glad Law, the nonprofit law firm that is really running things. They're really running the table for the Democrats in Augusta. I mean, you just see this constellation of nonprofits all connected by really dark money. We don't know who contributes to a lot of these organizations because the Schedule B for the Form 990 for a nonprofit is usually not listed. So, for instance, Glad Law, if I'm recalling correctly, their most recent annual report, I think, showed like $15 million in annual revenue, but we don't know where that money comes from. But it's spent on lobbying the Maine legislature, advocating, intervening on behalf of transgender men. I mean, they are all about Equality Maine is not about equality for women. It's not about equality for anybody except men. It's a shocking development on the left that no longer are the Democrats or the liberals the party fighting for women and girls. It's it. I can't tell you how disappointing it is. Every single time I get an email from the Maine Women's Lobby, you know, with this nonsense about, trans women are women, and this fight for recognizing every trans woman as some hero, putting up these men on pedestals, and the recent kerfuffle in Gorham. Oh my God. You're going to have drag queen story hour. Well, isn't that nice? I mean, drag used to be a form of protest, right? When there actually was laws against being gay. Well, let's remember that the Supreme Court has issued Obergefell decision that says all people, regardless of sexual orientation, have the right to marry, and every single gay person in this country has equal rights under the law. Okay, so that victory has been won. But now it's a battle for special rights for men, and the rights of women are being erased. I mean, it's just demonstrated in the Department of Corrections policy. And this is what Glad Law, the ACLU, the Maine Women's Lobby, Planned Parenthood, this is what they want to do, is they want to erase the protections on the basis of sex. They want to put it in the Constitution. They want gender identity, this like totally ambiguous term that is subjective, is just so it's so anti-science. It's just so anti-science. I mean, if you really don't believe that there are men and women, then, that's an ideology. That's a belief that's not grounded in reality. And you're entitled to that belief. But if you're running the government, then you're not entitled to compel everyone else to adopt that belief. And so let's hope that our Constitution is our protector. So far, I'm grateful to the United States Supreme Court. The most recent decision that came out of what was Colorado that said the ban on so-called conversion therapy, which was really just a ban on a woman's ability to speak, to counsel her patients in a way that she felt was best for them. Well, the Supreme Court, it wasn't a split between the liberals and the conservatives. There was one dissenting opinion by Justice Jackson, which doesn't surprise me. But the other liberals, Justices Sotomayor and Kagan, they joined with the majority, saying that the Colorado ban was unconstitutional, that there's freedom of speech, that you can't compel people to speak a certain way and to think a certain way. And for people who don't like this idea that there's freedom of religion, they think it's somehow Christian nationalism. Take a look at the Maine Constitution. Take a look at the United States Constitution. There's a specific reference to our rights under the Lord Almighty God to pray and to be free from, state compelled religion. So if you don't like the fact that we have religious freedom, which translates into the ability to have our own thoughts and beliefs, if you don't like it, then move somewhere else. We have these rights in the Constitution, and they are rights that belong to women and men. And gender identity is an unconstitutional government orthodoxy, and that's the news. That's the case. Stay tuned, and until next time, this is Cynthia Dill signing off. Take care.